Hello viewers, welcome to Newsweek South Asia, a show where we'll provide you fresh insights into South Asia's geopolitical, strategic and security situation. Let's take a look at the headlines first. New Delhi press conference sheds light on minority crisis in Bangladesh. Pakistan faces Taliban retaliation after airstrikes in Afghanistan. And Afghan women barred from NGO roles as Taliban deepen repression. Bangladesh faces a deepening crisis as violence and systematic persecution against minority communities intensify. Amid this alarming situation, the government's failure to curb human rights abuses starkly contrasts with its demand for India to repatriate ousted Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. In a powerful press conference held in New Delhi, journalists and activists came together to spotlight the worsening conditions of religious minorities in Bangladesh, calling out the government's apathy and urging accountability. Here's a report. Bangladesh is currently grappling with serious challenges related to religious intolerance, the treatment of minorities, and the rise of Islamic militancy. Since the rise to power of the Yunus government, extremist groups have been increasingly active, expanding their influence in the country. Radical Islamic groups continue to target minority communities, including Hindus, Christians, indigenous people, and tribal groups, often with the tacit support or indifference of the ruling regime. In response to these alarming developments, a significant press conference was recently held in New Delhi to highlight the dire situation faced by these vulnerable groups in Bangladesh. The event, hosted at the Foreign Correspondents Club of South Asia, sought to raise awareness about the escalating persecution and to draw attention to the grave human rights violations under the current political leadership.
Under Yunus' shoulder, militant Islamists are ruling the country. So until Yunus goes, nothing will happen. So this is illegal government. Somehow this government has to go. I don't know how, but we are here to help. We are urging the world, say, please look into this. A country cannot be run by an illegal government. Yunus government is an Islamist government.
The situation in Bangladesh has reached a critical juncture, marked by widespread and targeted violence against minorities, signaling a severe humanitarian crisis. Recently, at least 17 homes belonging to the Christian community were set on fire on Christmas Eve. The devastating arson attack occurred while the residents were away in a nearby village for prayers and Christmas celebrations, leaving them homeless and deeply traumatized.
All the elements of atrocities are in Bangladesh now towards minority people. The minority means it's not only Hindus, it targeted to Buddhist, Christian, Aboriginal people, tribal people, atheists, transgender, to everyone. So it's not only just Hindus. So the situation is very worse since 5th of August. It started with 5th of August, still happening. They are burning Christian house, they are burning Buddhist temple, they are burning Hindu temple, they are killing the Shabayat, the Shabayat of the Shoshan, they are killing them. It's everyday incident, and especially our daughters and mothers are not safe in Bangladesh now because they could be easily targeted.
Bangladesh's treatment of its minorities, coupled with its demands on India for the repatriation of ousted Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, exposes a glaring hypocrisy. This double standard is evident as Bangladesh attempts to exert pressure on neighboring nations like India, demanding Hasina's return while failing to address its own internal human rights violations. The recent Delhi press conference made it abundantly clear that India will not entertain any request to send Sheikh Hasina back to Bangladesh under any circumstances.
I believe India will never hand over Sheikh Hasina to Bangladesh, and India should not. Because India always help the helpless. So Sheikh Hasina is at this time is helpless. So as a Hindu majority, the Hindus always help the poor. So she should be. India should never give Sheikh Hasina to Bangladesh. So no question.
The international community continues to watch closely as the situation in Bangladesh evolves, with mounting calls for action to protect the rights and safety of its vulnerable minorities. The need for global intervention remains urgent as the persecution of these communities intensifies. Afghanistan, once a land of resilience and hope, has descended into a nightmare for its women under the Taliban regime. Since returning to power in August 2021, the Taliban have unleashed a relentless campaign to erase women from public life, defying international norms and plunging the country deeper into despair. Their latest decrees, banning women from NGO employment and even forbidding them from praying aloud, have drawn widespread condemnation. Here's a detailed look at the unfolding crisis.
The Taliban's latest decree banning women from working in national and international NGOs marks yet another dark chapter in the systematic oppression of women. The order threatens to revoke the licenses of any NGO that employs women, a move that has alarmed humanitarian organizations already struggling to deliver aid in a country on the brink of collapse. This decree is not an isolated act. It comes 2 years after the Taliban banned Afghan women from working in NGOs for allegedly not wearing the Islamic headscarf correctly. Now even stricter controls are being imposed, pushing women further into the shadows.
We're deeply alarmed by the recent announcement by the de facto authorities in Afghanistan that they will revoke the licenses of NGOs if they continue to employ Afghan women. This is absolutely the wrong path. NGOs play a vital role in providing critical life-saving assistance to Afghan men, women, girls, and boys. And this measure will directly impact the ability of the population to receive humanitarian aid. We urge the de facto authorities in Afghanistan to reverse this deeply discriminatory decree and all other measures which seek to eradicate women and girls' access to education, work, and public services. No country can progress politically, economically, or socially while excluding half of their population from public life. For the future of Afghanistan, the de facto authorities must change course.
The consequences of these policies are devastating. Afghanistan's humanitarian crisis is worsening, with over half the population living in poverty and dependent on aid. NGOs have been a lifeline, especially for women and children, who are the most vulnerable. The United Nations has warned that banning women from NGO roles will cripple relief efforts, as female workers are often essential in reaching marginalized communities. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk expressed deep alarm, stating, "I am deeply alarmed at the recent announcement by the de facto authorities in Afghanistan that non-governmental organizations' licenses will be revoked if they continue to employ Afghan women. This is absolutely the wrong path being taken by the de facto authorities. This is part of a broader pattern of repression. Women are barred from education beyond primary school, excluded from most professions, and prohibited from accessing public spaces such as parks and gyms.
Over the past 3 years, the women and girls of Afghanistan have seen an egregious erosion of their human rights. National edicts and local initiatives have curtailed their rights to education and decent work and ended their rights to freedom of movement, peaceful assembly, and freedom of expression. The cumulative impact has almost erased women and girls from public life and left them virtual prisoners in their own homes. This oppression of half the population based on gender is unparalleled in today's world and amounts to state-sponsored, systematic gender persecution. This is self-harm on a national scale, which will have catastrophic and intergenerational impact on the country's prospects for peace and sustainable development.
A new edict even forbids women from praying aloud, citing the Taliban's interpretation of Islamic law, which claims that a woman's voice is aura, something to be concealed. Experts warn that this repression is not just a human rights crisis, but also an economic catastrophe. Women represent nearly half of Afghanistan's potential workforce. By excluding them, the Taliban are crippling the nation's recovery and growth. The Taliban's policies are self-destructive, as no country can prosper while sidelining half its population. This is particularly evident in the healthcare sector, where banning women from nursing and midwifery programs has left critical gaps in an already fragile system. These measures are setting Afghanistan back by decades.
If you're removing women from nursing and midwifery especially, who is going to deliver those children? What happens when there is a pregnancy complication? Men aren't allowed to touch women or see women in hospitals. So when there is a complication, who are you going to, call for help? In fact, what's surprising about this is midwifery is a very traditional profession for women in Afghanistan. True, it wasn't formally a profession, but it certainly was a sort of informal profession in the sense that a village would have a midwife and go around. So if this is being barred, you're going to see these impacts on women's health, especially that of pregnant women, very, very soon. And the issue, of course, is there's not really going to be a backlash because, it's not a country where known for freedom of expression and things like that. Like I said, all of these are going to have a cumulative effect on Afghanistan being able to defend itself. It is going to weaken society. It is going to weaken the Taliban government itself.
The international community has repeatedly condemned the Taliban's actions, but the regime remains defiant. While no country has formally recognized the Taliban government, economic and political engagements continue, often without conditions tied to women's rights. Activists are calling for stricter measures, urging global powers to make any engagement with the Taliban contingent on restoring women's rights. Without such pressure, Afghan women face an increasingly bleak future.
Tensions along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border have escalated into violent clashes, with Pakistan paying the price for its own policies of fostering extremism. Recent airstrikes by Islamabad in Afghan territory have not only claimed civilian lives but also triggered retaliation from the Taliban. The Durand line dispute, decades of mistrust, and Pakistan's long history of supporting militant networks are now coming back to haunt it. Here's the full report. Violence has erupted along the Durand line as the Taliban launched a series of retaliatory operations against Pakistan following its controversial airstrikes in Afghanistan. On December 24, Pakistani jets targeted multiple villages in Afghanistan's Baramal district in Paktika province. These strikes, reportedly aimed at Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan hideouts, left widespread devastation in their wake. 7 villages, including Murg Bazar and Laman, bore the brunt of the attacks, with at least 50 people killed, many of them civilians.
पाकिस्तान ظلم وکړ ورته جنکای شودونه خواندې ماندې وروښه کړه خدای په خواشه وغون وطني خلک وويست.
In response, Taliban fighters attacked Pakistani positions in Paktia and Khost provinces, escalating tensions to a boiling point. The clashes have left both sides with heavy casualties, exposing the fragility of the relationship between Islamabad and the Taliban regime. Civilians continue to pay the highest price. Entire families have been wiped out and thousands have been displaced. Many of the victims were refugees from Pakistan's Waziristan region who had fled previous conflicts. At the heart of this conflict lies the disputed Durand line, a colonial-era border that has fueled tensions between Pakistan and Afghanistan for decades. Afghanistan has never recognized the Durand line, viewing it as an illegitimate demarcation that divides Pashtun communities. The Taliban's recent attacks highlight this deep-seated mistrust. While Islamabad accuses the Taliban of sheltering TTP fighters, the Afghan Taliban denies these allegations, instead accusing Pakistan of targeting civilians.
پاکستان یې چې دا دهشتګرد دي دا نه دهشتګرد دي دا ماشومان دي دا ښځینه دي دا وړکي دا جنکۍ دا غونډ د عوام خلک یې مړ کړی ده په پارین شپه کې یا تیره څومره مړ کړي دي یې په طالب نه دی مړ کړی.
Pakistan's claims of targeting TTP hideouts ring hollow in the face of its own history. For decades, Islamabad has nurtured extremist groups like the TTP for geopolitical leverage. But the strategy has backfired. The TTP, once considered a proxy for Pakistan's ambitions in the region, has turned into its most dangerous adversary. A United Nations report revealed that the Taliban continues to sympathize with TTP goals, supplying them with weapons and logistical support for cross-border attacks. Islamabad's support for the Taliban during its takeover of Kabul in 2021 now appears to have been a grave miscalculation. Pakistan had hoped that the Taliban regime would curb the TTP's activities. Instead, the Taliban has offered the TTP sanctuary, further destabilizing the region.
Late in 2020, when Taliban took over Kabul, everybody was thinking that what a great victory that this has been for Pakistan, that they have fooled the United States, all the while supporting the Taliban. And a lot of people thought that this was a masterstroke by Pakistan, that they now have an ally to their west, which is completely under their control. That was an overstatement even then, and it has turned out to be a complete lie now. What they have got on their western front is not an ally but an autonomous body, an autonomous movement on its own, which will do what it wants to do, and it will basically keep on pushing Pakhtun nationalism wherever it finds. So that's what has happened.
The Durand line, long a flashpoint of conflict, has now become a battleground. Civilians on both sides are caught in the crossfire as Pakistan's military strategies unravel. Islamabad's actions not only erode its credibility but also deepen instability in an already volatile region. In Pakistan's Karachi city, widespread protests erupted over the escalating sectarian violence in Durand district, which has claimed hundreds of lives and plunged the region into a dire humanitarian crisis. The demonstrators, led by the Majlis Wadate Muslimin, faced police brutality, reflecting the government's ineptitude in addressing both the unrest in Karachi and the deepening crisis in Kurram. Here's a full report.
Karachi descended into chaos as members of the Shiite political group Majlis Wahdat-e-Muslimin staged citywide sit-ins demanding immediate government action to quell the violence in Kurram district. Protests that began peacefully soon spiraled into clashes when police resorted to tear gas and bait-and charges to disperse demonstrators. The protest camps set up on key Karachi roads turned into battlegrounds, with rocks hurled and motorcycles set ablaze. The violent crackdown resulted in dozens of arrests and severe disruption of traffic across the city, drawing condemnation from activists and human rights organizations.
मलीर में आपने लोगों को स्ट्रेट फायर मारे, आप वहाँ बंद कीजिए फायरिंग, उसके साथ साथ लाइटें जलाइए। उलमाए कराम वहाँ अमन अमान को बहाल करना जाना चाहते हैं, लेकिन जो सूरत हाल वहाँ पर है ये काबिल कबूल नहीं है। लिहाजा मैं डीजी रेंजर साहब से, वजीर आला सिंध साहब से, आईजी साहब को कहता हूँ कि निहत्ते शहरियों पे इस वक्त सूरत हाल आपने रवा रखी है। धरने में जो बैठे थे उसके बाद आपकी गलत इकदाम की वजह से ये फिजा पैदा हुई है।
At the heart of the unrest lies the crisis in Kurram district, a region near the Afghan border plagued by decades of sectarian strife. Recent Sunni-Shia clashes have escalated into a full-scale humanitarian disaster. Parachinar, Kurram's main city, is paralyzed by road blockades, cutting off access to essential supplies. Reports from the ground reveal a grim picture. Over 100 children have died due to medicine shortages, and hospitals are overwhelmed with casualties.
روان دي سچويشن چې کوم جاری دی په دې کې لګبر 50 کسان موږ سره کوم دي هغه ډیډ بوډیز ریسیو شوی دی او تقریبا 100 نه زیات چې کوم دي هغه موږ سره زخمیان دي. زخمیانو کې ډیر داسې و چې هغه موږ کور ته ولېږلو، کوم چې سیریس وو هغه موږ مینیج کړي دي، هغه مو ریټین کړي دي، هغه ټریټمنټ روان دی، هغه چې کوم سرجریز دی هغه ډے نایټ 24/7 موږ هغه سرجریز جاری ساتلي دي هغه سره د وجې نه.
Despite provincial authorities announcing plans to disarm tribes in the region, locals remain skeptical, citing the government's repeated failure to provide security. The vacuum left by the state has been partially filled by private charities like the ED Foundation, which are delivering critical medical aid via helicopters. The government's inability to contain the violence and provide basic necessities has left Kurram's Shia community vulnerable to extremist factions. Militant groups with ties to the Afghan Taliban are exploiting the chaos, deepening the sectarian divide.
پرون کومه د انحراش واقعه شوې ده او د مین روډ نه سکیورټي حصار کې صدې کې کومه کنوي و هغه آرمي او د پولیس اف سي نگرانۍ کې کار د سیده سیده علاقې کې بار بار واقعات کیږي. مین روډ د ریاست ذمہ داری ده دا روډ کلیر کی او د کومه کروي شوی ده په کار ده فورن د کومه ناصر د دهشتګرد د ناصر د کروي وشي د فورن ونی ولای شي.
The unrest in Karachi and the crisis in Kurram are glaring reminders of the Pakistan government's failure to address deep-seated sectarian tensions and provide basic governance. As the protests grow louder, so does the question of whether Pakistan's fractured leadership is capable of restoring peace and protecting its citizens.
And with that, we come to the end of this edition of Newsweek South Asia. We'll be back next week with more news, views, and analysis from the subcontinent. Meanwhile, do keep writing to us at nwsa@anin.com. This is Shivangi Mishra signing off on behalf of the entire production team of Newsweek South Asia. Goodbye and take care.